Hello everyone, this is the discussion video for the Module 4 assignment. Let's take it from the top. Multiple choice. Number 1, the Black Death or the Black Plague in the Middle Ages was attributed to sin and immoral behavior. That's the so-called penal theory of evil. In other words, people suffer because God is punishing them for their sin. By the way, historically, that virtually never works out. Anyway, 1 is B. Number 2, which of the following is most important if psychotherapeutic healing is to take place? Well, of the 4 choices, by far the best is D, the patient's confidence in the healer's abilities. If there is zero confidence, for example, a placebo will not work. If there is zero confidence, psychotherapeutic healing will not occur. Because remember, psychotherapeutic healing has to do with perception and conception. In other words, the way people think about issues. It doesn't matter what's actually going on physiologically. So that's why the confidence issue is paramount. 2 is D. 3, Koro is attributed to the imbalance in yin and yang. Letter C. Number 4, which of the following behaviors, activities would not be considered anti-structural? Well, that should be pretty straightforward, right? Having a family and raising children, that's pretty much a normal, mundane, quotidian thing to do. And so therefore, for A. All the others are anti-structural. Number 5, that would be D, during the breakpoint stage. True, false. Just to back up, B, D, C, A, D. All right, true, false. Anthropologists reject the idea that spirits can cause sickness. That is true. That is true. Anthropologists have been studying this phenomenon for ages. And simply put, that is not a viable hypothesis at this time. So therefore it's rejected for all the reasons that were discussed in the materials you have. So true. Number 7, according to the anthropological understanding of psychotherapeutic healing, any exorcist from any culture could conduct a successful exorcism anywhere. Well, that is false. Just refer back to number 2 to get some insight here. There will be zero confidence in a totally foreign healer. So that makes that false. Number 8, shamans in the old world tend to use psychoactive substances to induce trance. That is false. In the old world, they tend to use drumming, singing, clapping, dancing, things like that. It's in the New World where they tend to use psychoactive substances like the Hivaro and the Yanomamo. So 8 is false. Number 9, Christian deliverance ministries in this country practice a form of ethnomedicine. Certainly, yes they do, because it is exorcism, and exorcism is, by definition, quote-unquote, ethnomedicine. It certainly didn't have anything to do with biomedicine. So that is true. Number 10, the Catholic Church today believes that dissociative behavior that some consider symptomatic of demon possession can best be dealt with by psychiatrists and psychologists rather than exorcists. That is true. In fact, that's why they made changes to the Ritual Romanum. And that's why today exorcisms sanctioned by the Catholic Church are rare compared to, let's say, 300-400 years ago. Even the church, in other words, is quote-unquote getting anthropological regarding this topic. Number 11, the woman in the exorcism video. In the Exorcism in India video, the one that was posted for you, thought to be possessed, my fault, was healed when the holy man So we're okay so far, but continue reading. When the holy man successfully exorcised the demonic spirit. Well, yes, healing occurred, but once again, the holy man was a sham, right? He intentionally was hoaxing the people he was working with just to prove a point. So clearly, everything that happened there was totally psychotherapeutic. She was never possessed by anything. And so therefore, the last part of that sentence makes it false, since it was therapeutic healing that was taking place. There was never a spirit present, as was quite obvious from his little experiment. Number 12, that would be animism. Number 13, sorcery. Top of the next page. In Buddhism, the Bodhi tree, B-O-D-H-I, served as a conduit between different levels of reality. About 500 years before the time of Christ, Siddhartha Gautama sat under the Bodhi tree, and it's said that there was a break in the unity of things, because all of a sudden he grasped something that no one else had. And that's an obvious sort of allusion to this sort of conduit that connects different levels of reality. And Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, took advantage of that and became enlightened. Anyway, the Bodhi tree, B-O-D-H-I tree. 15. In a trance state, the Yanomamo shamans work with the Hekura, H-E-K-U-R-A, the Hekura. That's in the reading on shamanism. Number 16, also from the reading on shamanism, the shamanistic cosmology. Cosmology has to do with the way people think the universe is structured. The shamanistic cosmology generally embraces the notion of a multi-layered cosmos. These layers tend to be parallel. They're all connected by some sort of conduit that allows movement between the layers. There's often, the earth is usually intermediary, meaning there's going to be upper layers and lower layers. However, I cautioned in the reading not to think of these as heavens and hells, because other people don't necessarily think that way. So let's don't make the absolutist mistake of extrapolating from our own beliefs and making some sort of conclusion about others. Okay, so they may have upper and lower levels, but they may not be anything like our heaven and hell. All right, Natima. That refers to the Hevero shaman, and it's the drink that they consume because it's necessary for them to enter the trance state for healing and to visit the world of the spirits and to work with the Tsinsak and all that sort of stuff. All right, and the Pasuk, again, we're talking about Hevero shamanism, and these are spirit helpers for Hevero shaman. Number 19, 20 and 21, pretty easy, just refer to the Kinsley reading. Number 19, spirit intrusion. That would be, I think, number 3 in the Kinsley book. Number 20, the answer is the number 4, disease sorcery. And then 21, the absurd idea that sexual behavior was the cause of AIDS. Number 5, breach of a taboo. I know most of you may not know the history, but of course people jumped all over gays at the time because they were a favorite scapegoat for a lot of things in the early 1980s, until it was quickly discovered that hemophiliacs were dying because of blood transfusions, and then of course later heterosexuals began to contract it too, and so that silly idea was relegated to the dustbin of history. Now, don't get me wrong, are some activities risky? Well, of course, but they don't quote-unquote cause anything, if that makes any sense. Right? These viruses and bacteria and so forth, they're opportunistic. they'll hitch a ride, quote unquote, on anything. All right. Anyway, so the answer there is number 5, breach of a taboo. Breach of a taboo, because it was considered to be taboo, and still is, among, let's say, the more religious sort of fundamentalist folks in our society today. So breach of a taboo is the answer for number 21. The one ability, number 22, that shamans have that other religious functionaries do not have. By the way, the term religious functionary is just a nice value-free term for significant religious figures in any culture. Anyway, so what's that one ability? Well, quite simply, they claim, of course it's a claim, to be able to access, personally access, the world of the spirits and the gods and the ancestors. They're the only religious functionary that makes that claim. Herbalists don't make that claim. Priests don't make that claim. But shamans do. Number 23. This came right out of the Kinsley book. How do these rituals promote social harmony? Well, and if I remember correctly, I did discuss this directly in the video. Healing will not occur unless a couple of things happen. Number 1, the patient's kinfolks have to confess their transgressions. And number 2, the patient must also confess any grudges he or she has. So in other words, it's a perfect time for people to air their grievances, air their issues, and there's a clear link there to social harmony. For that reason, it's just one big sort of social airing of grievances and problems and issues, which admittedly is a pretty clever way to try to maintain social harmony. Number 24, how does witchcraft in North Central Africa function as a means of social control? This came from one of my video lectures. Well, if you recall, when I was discussing witchcraft in North Central Africa, I mentioned that when some misfortune that's attributed to witchcraft befalls someone, immediately a short list is compiled of quote-unquote likely suspects. And then these people are all put through some sort of testing process. In other words, they're publicly vetted. Now we can guess that there is a certain amount of shame involved in this process. So clearly, anyone who wants to avoid being shamed or having people nosing around their personal business, they're going to pretty much abide by the culture's values, mores, customs, etc. Because after all, no one wants to be shamed publicly, and no one wants to have their private business being nosed into by elders. So it encourages, let's say, proper cultural behavior and functions as a means of social control. Number 25, pretty straightforward answer here, and the very important part here is from an emic perspective. In other words, from the insider's view. Well, what causes susto, according to the insider? Quite simply, the loss of the soul. There's been some frightening experience, some shocking experience, something has driven the soul away from the body, and that is the cause of susto. So how do we cure it? One answer: simply return the soul to the body. So in other words, it requires a spiritual cure, a quote-unquote psychotherapeutic cure of some sort that returns the soul. Top of the next page, 26. The primary purpose of the shamanistic initiation ritual is to take a person who is eminently structural and convert them into someone who is anti-structural. Because the idea is that your everyday average Jane or Joe cannot make trips to the spirit world and have an audience with the ancestors and the spirits and the gods. This takes a person who is quite literally special, right? Not mundane or average or rank and file, but someone who is very special. Someone who is not cultural, so to speak, but anti-cultural. So someone who's not structural, so to speak, but anti-structural. And the primary purpose of the shamanistic initiation ritual is to move the individual from this state of being totally structural and cultural to a state of being anti-cultural or anti-structural, thereby making them very special, quote unquote. All right. 27. How do they test whether or not they still have enough power? They will bewitch a tree by shooting a tsinsak at the tree, and if the tree splits where the tsinsak hits it, then the tsinsak are still powerful. Now remember, it's important to note, only the shamans see this happening because they're under the influence of natima. Just a regular, average, sober person standing nearby will not see the tree split. Of course, surprise, surprise, you probably could have guessed this, right, before you even told that. Anyway, so there you go. 28. It is said that evangelical exorcists are guilty of confirmation bias. What does that mean? Well, note, I do say do not simply define the term confirmation bias, because that's a mistake a lot of students make with a question like this. However, you obviously have to know what confirmation bias is. I assume it didn't take you but 10 seconds to Google it. So confirmation bias, basically, let's talk about this just a bit, then we'll get to the question, is the process whereby a person sort of sifts through the experiences and data and documentation available to them, and they unwittingly, I guess we can say, or maybe subconsciously, filter out everything that does not support their personal opinions, personal beliefs, personal sentiments, or whatever. So each day that passes, they grow stronger and stronger in their confidence and their belief, because everywhere all they see is confirmation of that belief. So basically they will go out of their way to avoid encountering or taking seriously disconfirming data and documentation and experiences. Okay, so today, for example, if you have someone, let's just pick on the right wing of the political spectrum, if you have someone who is very, very ultra-conservative today, they will only, for example, on television, watch Fox News all the time. They will listen to talk radio all the time, and they begin to believe that the greater world is like that, because all they expose themselves to are media that confirm their biases over and over and over. People on the extreme left will make the same mistake. Alright, so that's confirmation bias. So then what about the question? Well, how does it apply here? Well, quite simply, any form of dissociation, in other words, any abnormal psychological behavior will immediately be interpreted as demon possession. In other words, they'll make the same mistake people have made for ages, historically, until recently. Okay, so that's how that would play out here. In other words, they are totally ignoring Occam's razor. As an explanation for some bizarre event, they immediately jump on the, by far, the least probable hypothesis. Alright, 29. The anthropological perspective of exorcism as psychotherapeutic healing Well, I talked quite a bit about this, so I expect to see quite a few details here. It's a 19-point question. When you see 19 points, never write 3 sentences, because there is no way in the world you can effectively cover the question in 3 sentences. All right, so what are some things we talked about? Well, we can talk about how it's not therapeutic. And it's not therapeutic because anthropologists argue that there is nothing for the individual to be healed from with the exception of an idea. So if we just change their perception of the situation, then we have healing. So that's what makes it psychotherapeutic. What we're doing is we're not healing the individuals of some alien entity, some invading force, but rather we're just changing their mind about how they perceive their situation. That's why it's psychotherapeutic healing. So here are some reasons that sort of approach can be argued. Number one, just look at history. For ages, people mistook things like Tourette's, epilepsy, various psychotic states, as schizophrenia, as being attributed to demonic possession. Well, they didn't know any better. That's true of even all the old ancient holy books. Same issue. It's not until recently that we began to correctly diagnose these dissociative maladies as Tourette's or epilepsy or schizophrenia or some other psychotic issue, and we've been able to medicate them or deal with them effectively, because after all, today epileptics and schizophrenics even can lead normal lives. So there's the historical issue. So the point there being that for ages we have been making a mistake, and the more we learn about dissociative behaviors, the less and less necessary, I don't know if that grammatically came out right, but anyway, I think you get the point, is the diagnosis of demon possession. It simply doesn't hold water anymore. Even the church, as I explained in my video, even they have become quite wary. And so therefore they very seldom sanction exorcisms anymore. Also too, cross-culturally, there are way too many different explanations of what's going on, way too many concepts of what the demons are, way too many different forms of healing that are used in the exorcism ritual. And when you combine that with the fact that exorcism always quote-unquote works, then we can see that what we're talking about is something that does have to do with perception and not reality. Remember, voodoo death, quote-unquote, works in Australia, but it doesn't work in places where they don't recognize the phenomenon. So clearly, enculturation is a very important component of all this. And then you could discuss the placebo effect, because what's happening is very similar to that. With the placebo effect, a person that has an issue is given some placebo. It may be a sugar pill, it may be a salt tablet, whatever the heck, and the person experiences, or they think that they're getting better. So why do they think that? Well, there's a lot of confidence in the physician, there's confidence in the medicine, and that is enough to cause a sensation of improvement, physiological improvement. But it is just a perception, though. Basically, that's what's happening with exorcism. After all, the culture makes a huge fuss about this individual. They will bring in very important shamans or priests, and other people to assist. They bring all the knowledge that culture has to bear on the issue. This person is the focal point of lots of attention, and so clearly that's going to enhance the quote-unquote placebo effect in this case. So there is healing that happens, but it's a perception of healing. That's why we call it psychotherapeutic. All right, thank you.